Surprise! And welcome to a prequel to our next edition of Real Talk, where we will be talking about all things property taxes. But we wanted to come live this evening and take the opportunity to speak with our realtor members, both MetroTex and alike. And so I get to actually welcome Justin Landon, officially the new CEO of MetroTex. So, Justin, thanks for being in your new office.
Thank you. It's exciting to be official and on the show, unlike last time where I was still sort of, waiting to exhale, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now we're all gasping for air because we are going to just start for the first few minutes, maybe a little bit of Q&A, guys, but we're going to jump right to the property taxes. So we'll kind of start right at 5:40 with that conversation. Hey, Bradley. But we want to just give our members a little bit of information. We don't have anything solidified yet, as people know, with the NAR. Settlement is just proposed at the moment. But I think, Justin, that's the biggest opportunity we have is while this is a proposed settlement, the changes are imminently going to happen. And so we want to make sure that we're promoting and disseminating good information to our members and also maybe give them a tactical takeaway from the next few minutes. So if you don't mind, maybe kind of talk about the synopsis of the bomb from Friday.
Yeah. So as we said in our communication that went out to all the members last week, on Friday, when the settlement news dropped, we had the opportunity to speak with NAR leadership for just a few minutes as it was going live on the New York Times. It caught us by as much surprise as it did everybody else. It was news to us as well. And over the last 3 or 4 days, we've seen an awful lot of commentary, both in our phones and our text messages, and certainly on social media channels of people, rightfully so, grappling with what may be required of them in the future. And change is always hard. But as we look at the settlement agreement, I think if nothing else, it's going to give us the opportunity to have a preview for what our industry is going to look like in the future. We still have to wait for it to be approved. That could take as much as most of the rest of the year. But according to the settlement agreement, we've agreed, the royal we, in this case, the National Association of Realtors, has agreed to implement a few changes, particularly on the MLS rule set. And those have to be implemented by early July. So we're going to start moving pretty quick to take advantage of this settlement agreement.
So, and I think that's prudent because I've seen a lot of people say it's premature to even talk about how to, approach this and talk about these changes, which we heard today in consulting. MetroTex is obviously has also been named in a copycat lawsuit in Texas, and so still keeping abreast with our attorneys and asking those questions, who are also daily in communication with NAR. We asked them today, what does that look like? Are we really putting the cart before the horse? And they said, you are, but you have to, essentially. So, let's talk about the fact that while they are proposed, the changes are happening from the structural confines of doing the business.
Yeah, I think I would say it's probably too early to be making business decisions, but it's not too early to start gaming out what they're going to look like. I think there are still some clarifications we need from the National Association. The MLS Advisory Board for NAR meets next week, and I think that will be very helpful in us getting some feedback from them about what they meant by some of the rule changes. You've seen a lot of speculation about, okay, so one rule change, commission field goes away in the MLS, but cooperative compensation has not gone away, right? Cooperative compensation can still take place, but outside the MLS. So the question is, well, I know you've told me what I can't do, but tell me what I can do. And I think that's really what we're going to be working toward over the next few weeks, is identifying what is possible within the confines of the settlement. And we just don't have those answers yet, but I think we're all going to be in that dialogue to identify what the path forward is. The second piece, major rule changes requiring a buyer rep agreement at time of showing or before showing. And I think the good news is here in Texas, we have a really strong buyer representation documentation culture. That is not true nationwide. I can say, having come from another state where they're very rarely used. So we've got a leg up. but certainly some work to be done to make that document even stronger, and making sure that it's working in concert with all the other documents that are going to float through the transaction process. I think we definitely have an opportunity to educate both our members and the consumers in the weeks and months ahead. And I know at MetroTex, we are absolutely committed to doing that work.
No, and I think that's great. And I think that's the hard part, is that so many people are grappling for what's next. What do I have to do? The shoe is dropped. What do and unfortunately, it's kind of one of those, we're all in that hurry up and wait mode. But business has to still go on. And I think the best thing that I would say to people that are getting questions from their clients is, talk to your broker. For one, the brokers individually should be giving insight to their agents. But two, I know MetroTex is going to be bringing on resources, courses, forums. We already had some that were in the works, because we obviously knew buyer's agency was something that has been a big topic. NAR is offering the ABR for free right now. And so the best thing we can do is educate ourselves on educate, because nobody's going to work for free. And I think that's been my point, is buyer's agents aren't working for free. It's just the structure in which they are having to navigate their compensation and their fee being paid is a little bit different. Michelle, I think, unfortunately, we can't answer how it's going to work for veteran buyers. I know that's a hot topic right now. What I will say is I think that our policy changes up front on here are also going to force dialogue for policy changes in other areas of our business. Justin, you were about to say something on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think there's a decent chance that some of the mechanisms that we've relied on, which is buyer agent bringing a buyer and listing agent compensating buyer agent through a cooperative compensation, which would be perfectly permissible for a veteran buyer, may still very much continue into the future, although a little less efficiently than it happens today. Perhaps
Sure.
We're going to have to take an extra step. I also believe really strongly that there's going to be a huge commitment to ensuring that as these rules go into place, that we're making the appropriate adjustments. I mean, this is a complicated ecosystem. And do I think that all the attorneys involved fully understood the complexity of this ecosystem? I don't. I think we're going to have to consider how it affects appraisals, how it affects mortgage and title, and certainly FHA and VA and USDA and all the other organizations that are going to be impacted by a modification here. And this is where I think, as frustrated as we are with the National Association, they're going to play a huge role in helping us make a difference. That's where our voice collectively is necessary. And I share a lot of the frustrations, but I also acknowledge we need that collective voice. And I look forward to trying to make sure we're holding NAR accountable to doing that work on behalf of your clients and our members.
No, and I think that's amazing. And Janae, that's one thing that Justin and I have spoken about, and so is our leadership team, is that we will stay informed with Texas Realtors and TREC and Netris up here in North Texas to make sure that we have an understanding of timing and what this looks like. And while implementation has to happen mid-July, it essentially, all of these things need to be working in the background now so that we have appropriate time to review and discuss and to prepare. But we will keep everybody updated. Again, it's only been 5 days, and while we wanted to get on and have this quick discussion and upfront to say we will be available, we are approachable, we will be very vocal with our members here in the upcoming days, weeks, and months to help them with as many resources, because Justin, as our members can read in our mission statement, that our goal is to be the indispensable resource to our realtor members, and that's what we're committed to do. So I appreciate you bringing this to me tonight, saying, hey, Ashley, let me jump on with you for a few minutes so they can see my face and your face collectively, and saying, this is hard. We are here for you guys, and we are going to get on the other side of this. Realtors are resilient, aren't we, Justin?
Amen. We've been through a lot over the years, whether it was sub-agency or VOWs or getting rid of the MLS books. I mean, we have been through challenges before. It's always hard to say whether this one in front of us is bigger than the last one, but I really believe in the resiliency of the industry. I believe in the necessity of the industry. And what I've been so encouraged by, really, other than a few really grossly inaccurate news media stories,
Yep.
no one is saying that buyers agents don't play a huge role in our economy and in our real estate, helping people reach the American dream. And I think that's going to continue to be a strong narrative moving forward. The consumer needs you, and we want to make sure they know it.
Awesome. Well, Justin, thank you so much. I think you flew in at lunchtime immediately. We were in meetings, and then you're popping on here. Luckily, you had a change of clothes because you're always prepared, just like a good realtor is. So is the Realtor Association CEO. So, folks, we are going to get to our regular scheduled programming, talking about property taxes. What another fun topic that we get to encapsulate tonight, Justin. But thank you again. And if we can put Justin's email in the chat, it is, what is it? Justin L?
Justin L at dfwre.com, I believe. But Parker can confirm that and put it in there for us.
It might even be .net. We don't know. Justin's still learning his email, but we will drop Justin's email in the chat, and just know that you can reach out to him. You can reach out to myself. There we go. You got it right, Justin. And we will be here in coming. The one thing I do want to let everybody know is that we do have our general membership meeting next Thursday. And I think that's also a time where we will probably touch on an update on this. So we will get that posted in the chat so you guys can see us live and in person at the headquarters in Irving. And we look forward to continuing this conversation. So Justin, you're off the hook for this evening, sir.
Thank you. Give Daniel and Mark my best, and y'all have fun. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, sounds good. Bye. Thank you. All right. Look at that. So quickly, technology can work sometimes. So Daniel and Mark, thank you so much for waiting in the technology waiting room there just for a few minutes. So we just wanted to, again, come out while using this tool to disseminate wonderful information that we're going to talk about this evening. We appreciate you guys being gracious with your time and allowing us to do that. So without further ado, Daniel Gonzalez with Gonzalez Public Affairs and Consulting, and Mark Hutcheson with Popp Hutcheson. Guys, thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. Okay. Well, let's talk about another fantastic topic that everybody loves to hear about, and that's the property tax space. So, if each of you wouldn't mind just kind of giving us a little bit of your background. Daniel, let's start with you first. I think some of our viewership might have seen you before. We try to do this once a year on the property tax process and nuances and different things there. But if you wouldn't mind just touching on what you do, not only for MetroTex, but around the state.
Sure, absolutely. Again, Daniel Gonzalez here. Thank you for having me. I've been around for a while, unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not sure which one, but I was with the Texas Association of Realtors for nearly 20 years until the end of 2019. And then I decided to do what you do and go be an entrepreneur. And I started my own consulting lobby practice, have a number of clients around the state. I am privileged and honored to count MetroTex as a client. Love working with you guys. Still work with realtors there in the Dallas area, also in the Houston area. So have Houston as well. But I have a lot of clients, in the electricity space, broadband space, family medicine. So kind of all over the place.
Sure.
Somehow I've been able to learn a few things about property taxes over the years, but it's all because of people like Mark Hutcheson who have had a lot of knowledge to share and willingness to share that knowledge over the years. But Mark and I have worked very well in the past in the legislature in years past, and we'll see what happens in the future years with property tax.
Awesome. All right. Now, Mark, you have the pleasure of being specifically in this space of property taxes. Now, give us a little bit about what you do, and which will segue into what we're going to talk about tonight as far as process and procedures and cause and effect with some things that we discuss in regards to property tax relief, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I am Mark Hutcheson. I'm a partner with the firm of Popp Hutcheson. recently acquired by Ryan LLC, which is another big state and local tax firm. I started in the legislature back in the late 80s as a staffer, and then went to law school and started with a big firm and ended up lobbying in the legislature and ended up working for the Texas Association of Property Tax Professionals. That was a client that my boss gave me when I was a brand new attorney. And I started learning the tax code and negotiating with appraisal districts about tax policy. And then lo and behold, in 96, I started talking to my now partner, Jim Popp. And I started working with him in 99, and we've been together ever since. So I've been a exclusively property tax attorney, working for taxpayers only, for about 26 years. And I'm also a senior tax consultant.
That's amazing. And so a big part of what we want to do this time of year is really talk about first the process itself, because I think there's so much confusion as to how this all works. We like to call this the shock and awe season, where come April, everybody gets an assessment on both residential and commercial properties in the mail, and they gag, they pick up the phone or text their realtor and go, what do I do? And then unfortunately, even realtors are confused by the process and how the multi-tiered process works. And so maybe if one of you guys wouldn't mind taking, kind of the layered approach really quickly of what that looks like and why it's done in the way it is.
Yeah, I think, and Daniel, I'll take this over if you want me to. The process in Texas, I think, is best articulated by understanding the tax calendar. So sure. All values are set as of January 1. So January 1 of any given year is the valuation date. It's called the lien date. It's the date on which the value is based. The districts will spend the first couple of months of the year trying to figure out value, and they'll notice value in April. More and more districts are noticing earlier and earlier. I think Rockwall's already noticed, which was pretty surprising.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but April 15th is the general notice period. You have until May 15th to file a protest. It's actually May 15th or 30 days after you receive the notice, whichever's later. But we always instruct our clients to make sure that they file their protest by May 15th. Used to be May 30, a little confusion. About 5 or 7 years ago, it was backed up by the legislature to May 15th. Once the protest is filed, they will schedule ARB hearings. The ARB is the Appraisal Review Board. That's right. Typically a board of lay people who are currently nominated by the local judges, but they're also selected by Appraisal District Board of Directors. They sit in 3-member panels, and they'll typically have a 15-minute hearing on your property, on your value, and then make a decision right then and there. There's a document that's generated out of that hearing called an order determining protest. And when you receive that document, that sets a new deadline, which is your deadline to follow the second step of the process, which is to either litigate in district court or go to arbitration. In Texas, you can go to binding arbitration if you have a value of less than $5 million. And if it's more than that, then your option is to go to district court. Generally speaking, for residential properties, most residential properties are resolved at the first step, which is that protest level. Commercial properties and higher value properties usually go forward on both steps. Okay. Most of what I do is commercial and industrial, but we certainly have a few high-end residentials that we'll take care of as well. The process, as far as the evidence, is the same at both levels. You have 2 remedies that most taxpayers rely upon. One is market value, claiming that the market value is too is not as high as the district thinks it is. Generally, for residential properties, that's a sales comparison approach. So go out and look at comparable sales. For commercial properties, it's generally the income approach. How much income can the property generate? Obviously, interest rates and changes in interest rates have a material impact on those values, which is why we're kind of in a state of flux, because sales are still lagging a bit to reflect the changes of interest rates that we've experienced over the last 2 years. The other remedy that's very important for people to understand, it's really the remedy that most taxpayers use when they're at the protest level, is the equal and uniform or equity remedy. So it's real simple. You look at the value of your property, typically on a value per foot basis, and then you look up and down your block and around the street and around your neighborhood and find properties that are comparable to yours. And if they have a comparable lot size and a comparable access and location, and the house is comparable, then the value per foot should be comparable. And if it's not, then you put it in a spreadsheet and you apply the median per foot value of the comps to the square footage of the subject, and that gives you an indication of value. So that's the basic structure. After the protest level, you have 60 days when you get that order determining protest to go to arbitration or file a lawsuit if you want to. Most lawsuits are resolved in the September through March timeframe. And then hopefully, if you have your case fully resolved, you'll pay taxes at the end of January. Tax bills generally come out in October, so sometimes as early as September. But yeah, that's the general process. Daniel, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I think Mark. I think you did a great job on the process.
Yeah, I don't know what I would add to that. I mean, that's bravo.
Yes.
Well,
no, that's great on the structure, and I think we gloss over the other options, the arbitration and the litigation, and obviously the space that you're in. That is a frequent case that you are going to those measures. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because Texas is unique, because we are one of the only states that allows for arbitration. Isn't that correct?
it is. I mean, Texas actually, as much as we all hate property taxes and moan about the process, we have the best process in the country, and it's not even close. The second place is not even close to us. The best remedies and the most efficient remedies. You mentioned New Jersey. You can absolutely have a case in New Jersey that lasts a decade. And it happens all the time. In many other jurisdictions, taxing entities can intervene in your appeal if they think the value is too low, and they can raise values. One of the great things we have in Texas is if you go forward on a protest, let's say you bought the property, or your client purchased a property and it's on for more than the district put it on for, but it's still unequal when compared to comparable properties in your neighborhood. You can pursue that equal and uniform remedy without any fear of your value being raised. The legislature changed that a few years ago. So the process in Texas is the best. The remedies that we have are the most robust for any taxpayer across the country. And ultimately, arbitration is a useful and efficient remedy that a lot of taxpayers can use if they're not happy with what happened at the ARB level.
I think that's great. Go ahead, Daniel.
I would just add too on arbitration, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe also under Texas law, if the property owner decides they want to go to arbitration, the appraisal district must go to arbitration. They don't have an option in that. So truly the taxpayer is in charge here, is in control. Yeah.
The only caveat to that is the taxpayer has a unilateral right to binding arbitration for properties under $5 million. For properties over $5 million, if the district agrees, you can go to binding arbitration, but they rarely, if ever, do. So that's the one caveat.
That's right.
Well, so let's get into there's some changes that obviously happened with our property tax relief bill that both structurally to the board of directors for the appraisal districts directly, but then also just some different. So let's talk first some new elections that we've seen go on here that will be happening in some more populated districts. So Daniel, maybe you can touch on that just a little bit. We've got some new candidates out there, and why did that happen?
Yeah, we do. So Senate Bill 2 that was passed, I believe, in the second called session last summer. That bill did a whole bunch of things, including increasing the homestead exemption from 40,000 to 100,000. Also made some changes, throughout the process, including applying an appraisal cap for the first time to some commercial properties at 5 million or below in value. But one of the most interesting aspects of that bill was indeed, as you mentioned, the election of at least 3 folks to the board of directors of an appraisal district. And this will be the first time that there are elected positions of the appraisal district that come from outside of the taxing entity. So the way that it worked before was the city county would nominate people, and then they would essentially nominate and elect somebody to the board of directors. But now we, the voters, will have an opportunity to vote on 3 members of the Appraisal Review Board. Kind of a historic change, if you will, in the law. One thing that I would mention, though, is it's interesting that these elections, these board members will have, some pretty good power. Now, before I say what I was going to say, it is important to remember too that the board of directors, their function is really to hire and fire, the chief appraiser. They adopt a budget for the Appraisal Review Board, and they adopt a appraisal plan for the district. It is really the chief appraiser who hires, the other staff, and they're the ones who are actually doing the work of the appraisal district.
Sure.
But having said that, in this Senate Bill 2, it did say that the board of directors, they will now, if they are acting as the appointing authority of the Appraisal Review Board members, this will happen in counties of 75,000 or above in population, that the board of directors, if they are acting as that appointing authority, they must make appointments to the Appraisal Review Board by a majority vote. And here's the caveat, that with at least 2 members of the majority being elected members of the board of directors. So 2 of the 3 elected members of the board must be in the majority when they appoint members of the Appraisal Review Board. So that is, in my opinion, pretty significant power that these elected officials will have. And that election, I believe, will be on May 4th of this year with all the other local elected officials as well.
There's a lot of complaints about ARB members being biased, being kind of one-sided for the appraisal districts. Part of the reality is it's very difficult for districts to find people to serve on the ARBs. I think they get $100 a day. If you've ever been through that process, it's pretty grueling in the summertime. Those guys are there for 10 hours. A lot of them are in their 70s and 80s. And it's really, it's just the truth of the matter. What ends up happening is they get institutionalized after they're there for a certain period of time, and they hear arguments from tax consultants and from property owners, all different arguments with all different levels of credibility, but the same person from the appraisal district is sitting in front of them all day long, every day, and so they start to develop relationships with them. It's just natural. So the process is not perfect, but we try to make it such that selecting ARB members is as unbiased as possible. And the more important piece, I think, is how long ARB members can stay on and re-up. And we've, over the years have tried to control that. But that's one thing that the districts push back on a lot is the ability to not have their ARB members term out. But they do get institutionalized, and that is an issue.
Well, I mean, that happens anywhere. I mean, we talk about the Realtor Association. I mean, that we like to hold on to a good volunteer,
That's right.
as long as we can. And it's really easy to get, intertwined in, the narrative or what we're doing and create those bonds and allegiances. And they're not done out of malice. It's just like you said, Mark, it's natural that those relationships get built. So I think that was their effort, right? That was the mindset behind having these elected members of the board of directors, to have a little bit, well, not a little bit, to have control to make sure that the appropriate people are sitting on those appraisal review hearings. So I guess a little bit of a win there.
It is, but I think we tend to focus a lot on the adversarial piece of the process, and specifically getting frustrated at ARB hearings. If you've ever gone to a hearing and felt ignored and ruled upon arbitrarily, which I have thousands of times, you do get frustrated and you get jaded, and you want to try to change the system. But I can tell you that Daniel just mentioned the legislature last session made some material impacts that will help every taxpayer in Texas. And it doesn't really have much to do with the ARB process. It has to do with tax rate selection. So the whole idea behind our tax code back in 1979, when the Pivotal bill was passed, was to depoliticize the process and create a county appraisal districts that set value and keep them separate and apart from the taxing entities that set their tax rates. So the property tax equation is value times rate equals levy.
Right.
So if you think about levy as the total amount that they collect every year, there were really material changes that happened to our system back in 2019. Paul Betancourt had a bill that basically said, if the levy is more than 2.5% for school districts or 3.5% for taxing entities, for all the other local taxing entities, the tax rate has to come down to offset, so that the levy collection is not more than those amounts, apples to apples. It doesn't include new construction and things like that.
Sure.
But apples to apples, the levy increase year over year could only on average be about 3%. Before 2019, taxing entities could go up to 8%.
Oh, wow.
Year over year. And if they went beyond 8%, all that meant was that they were subjected to a petition where the local county population, if they got 15% of the population signatures, could force a rollback election. It never happened. It's a huge burden. There was a short time window for them to get the petition and actually have that election. Well, this new bill that happened in 2019 said it's effectively a 3% increase over year, and it's an automatic election if any taxing entity wants more than that. So what's happened? I'll give you an example. In Austin, for example, where I'm currently from, tax rates in 2019 were roughly between 2.25 and 2.4. Our most recent tax rate for 2023 was 1.8%. Wow. And that's just because the value gains were way greater than a 3%. And so as a result, rate compression functioned the way it was supposed to, and people got real tax relief. That's really the case throughout the entire state. In the Metroplex, it's the same thing. You'll see your tax rates have dropped from 2.5 to 2. Or 2.5 to 2.1. It's really remarkable. That's the story. That's the real property tax relief that I think everyone's experienced. Last session, as Daniel will probably mention, the legislature had like a $33 billion surplus, and they used $12 billion of that to further buy down the school district tax rate by 10 or 11 cents. What that did was reduce that tax rate even further. So there's a big move on rates. That is the focus that the legislature should have on. I'm personally against politicians getting into the weeds about valuation. They don't know about it. They don't understand it, and they want to create broad brush methodologies in the statutes, which really create more harm than good. The focus should always be on the tax rates, which is where it has been over the last couple of sessions due to Paul Betancourt. Daniel, what do you have to think about that?
Oh, and Ashley, I mean, look, our audience is a great, springboard here. Is you have a house that's under contract. I bet everyone, who's watching right now can say that if you get an appraiser, if you get 3 appraisers out there at that property, guess what you're going to have? 3 different
values.
Appraisals are subjective. That's just the nature of them. So when you try to really pinpoint what is value, I don't know what that is. And Mark's right. The legislature has made some great strides and tried to do some property tax relief, and that's compressing the rate, which that's what he was talking about. When they spend $12 billion in that, or 18, if you look at the last 2 cycles, it's a total of $18 billion in compression. So that's money that you don't have to pay. Taxpayers don't have to pay. I mean, you already paid it another way, so there's sales tax or whatever it is. But ultimately, it's going back to compressing school property tax rates. So I want to make sure that we understand that when we talk about compression, the only tax rate that the legislature can control or has somewhat control over is the school property tax rates. They don't have any control over a city tax rate, a county tax rate. That's your county commissioners or your city council. So they concentrate on the school side of the equation, because 50+% of your tax bill is your school district. So plus the legislature in the Constitution, they're required to provide, I think a diffusion of knowledge, I think is what the Constitution says. So that's where I think the legislature, is going. Should you care about your appraisal? Absolutely. I think you should. You should certainly hire people like Mark, and his firm. But, at the same time, I think where the legislature is going and where they want to continue to provide property tax relief is really on the compression of the school tax rates.
And that's huge. And I think people, the property tax relief bill, obviously, just for headlines, just like everything else that hits the news cycles, right? We like to see clickbait. We like to see sexy headlines. And in all reality, we had the compression. We had the increase in the homestead exemption. So is there anything else that came through there functionally, though, that we need to discuss with our audience so they're aware? Because I know, Mark, we talked about this. There were powers that were always there to review exemptions and other things like that. But I think the wording was now they must review homestead exemptions every 5 years or have a mechanism in which to do that. And I think that's really important to highlight here. Well, you said they always had the power. It's whether or not they asserted it. And now they're basically saying you must. Is that correct?
Yeah. And for the audience, what Ashley's talking about is in the Texas Tax Code, Chapter 11. That's where all of our exemptions are housed. There's 2 kinds of exemptions. There's the kind of one and done exemption. You apply for it once, and you don't have to reapply for it every year. And then there's the exemptions that you do have to reapply for every year. The homestead exemption, the agricultural use exemption qualification, those are kind of one and done. You apply for it once, and you don't have to reapply for it every year. Well, what the legislature did that Ashley's referring to is to say that the appraisal districts need to start reviewing homestead the homestead qualification every 5 years. What that means is every 5 years on some rotating schedule, homeowners will receive a new application in the mail that they'll need to fill out in order to continue it. And it's for people who may not qualify anymore for the homestead exemption, who might have more than one homestead exemption. You see people do that sometimes. So I mean, it's an additional burden on homeowners, and I'm sure it was part of a negotiated bill that the taxing entities wanted, just to confirm that if we're going to increase the homestead exemption to 100,000, which means if your value is 300,000, you're only taxed on 200,000. If your value is 1.2 million, you're taxed on 1.1 million. In order to have that, the district said, fine, but we want something in the legislature to say, hey, we can go back and every 5 years make sure that they actually qualify. One of the interesting things about the homestead exemption is how it hits different jurisdictions differently.
Yes, it does.
If you're in a smaller county, a more rural county, where a lot of your land's already exempted under ag use, and a lot of your homes may, if the median home in your county is only $250,000, $100,000 homestead exemption is very meaningful.
Yes.
If you're Austin now and the median home value is 800,000 or whatever it is, maybe it's not that high. It's less meaningful, but those are really material changes that help homeowners. That coupled with rate compression will kind of, for the first time since I've been doing this, which is almost 30 years, give really material benefit to taxpayers.
No, and I think that's huge. And there were a lot of things that were floating around, that people wanted to see. They wanted to run the gambit, right? I mean, caps coming down to 5%. We wanted rate compression. We wanted an increase from 40 to 100,000. And we really, the cause and effect to the ecosystem was we couldn't have it all. We still do need taxes. We still need to make sure that there is an equitable way of levying taxes across the board. And if you reduce that cap rate too much, then it was going to really cause an unequal effect in property to property and how they were being taxed from a more tenured homeowner to a new homeowner. So I have to say hi to my beautiful daughter, Alex, who's in the other room right now watching me. At 10 years old, she still even likes to consume all of this knowledge. So I appreciate it, baby. But I do want to talk to Chandler for a second. And Chandler has been very involved on the Tarrant County side with the appraisal districts and being involved in that process. So first, Chandler wanted to know, Mark, if your firm is supporting any candidates. I mean, just like any other elected office, there are people that will obviously get behind candidates that are in their purview. So are you guys getting involved in any of that?
We have not. I mean, I have not personally gotten involved with any of those races. I'm not sure about Brent Ryan or the 5,000 member Ryan organization, but
sure.
But I mean, it's a touchy thing getting involved
Sure.
When we're so intimately involved with those folks. We don't want to create enemies as much as we would like to create friends. So yeah, the answer to that question.
That's a good way to say it. I like that, Mark.
No.
You don't want to create enemies as much as you want to create friends. So
yeah.
I think, I think that's great. And then Chandler had a follow-up question. If the appraisal district decided to reappraise properties every 2 or 3 years instead of every year, what do you think some unintended or adverse consequences would be caused?
That's a great question. And actually it happens in many states where they have assessment cycles of 3 or 4 years where they re-hit. I personally don't like it. And the reason why is because the longer you spread out the time frames that the districts value, the more unequal the process is. The market doesn't move in one total mass at the same time. If you know what's been happening with office buildings right now, you know that they're in a death spiral, and
yes,
their values will reflect that probably in 24 and 25. If they were assessed, if the office assessment cycle came up in 24, they might get the benefit of achieving a 3 or 4 year permanent valuation or kind of structured valuation for that time frame, whereas multifamily or other properties that are doing better,
sure.
At some point the economy might shift for them. And so to me, the way that you can maintain equity in the system and make sure that the burden of the tax is kind of equally shared is to try to make that valuation determination as frequently as possible. It's practically impossible to do it more than once a year. I know a lot of people would like to have a 2 or 3 year period before they would have to fight again. But what you end up with in other states is appraisal districts are much less likely to negotiate values if they think it's going to have a 3-year impact.
Yeah.
And so you get stuck in systems that take forever to unwind, and create structural inequities.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So Daniel, yeah, please.
No, and actually, I would just add to it that the legislature wouldn't like it. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the state budget for the past 10, 15, 20 years, the number fluctuates every single session. But in the budget itself, there's basically a line item that says this budget anticipates a 3 to 5% increase in local property values. And the reason why it has it in there is because of school funding. So if you went to a 2 or 3 year between an appraisal between every 2 or 3 years, the legislature would have to come up with more money for school funding because they are taking advantage of the increases in property values. Now it's come down in recent years, but they are indeed taking advantage of the increase in values because think about it as a bucket, if you will. So you have a bucket of funding. What goes in there in the bucket first in terms of funding are local tax dollars coming from the appraisal. So if appraisals are every 2 to 3 years, you're going to have less local funding going into that bucket. So the remainder is going to be filled up with state funding. So that's kind of how the system works, very, generically speaking. But yeah, the legislature, it would cost, the state a lot of money, taxpayers a lot of money, because they would have to put billions of dollars more into public education if you went to a 2 or 3 year process.
And also remember that just because, if we went to a system of every 3-year valuation, doesn't mean your taxes are the same every 3 years.
That's
right. Tax rates will continue to change. And so the only meaningful mechanism that taxpayers have in this system is to challenge value. If you take that opportunity down to once every 3 years, unless you're willing to sit in those tax rate hearings at every taxing jurisdiction and really start a movement in that regard, which no one ever has.
I don't want to. I'll just put that out there right now. Yeah.
Then you end up with a problem. Yeah.
Well, just like Christy, just hold on one second. Just like Christy just posted, and she said, I'm now seeing county appraisals higher than market values. And so we did see, and that's that lagging effect, right? So to that point, Mark, if we have county appraisals that are higher than market values for a 2 to 3 year cycle, you'd have to wait till then, Christy, to sit there and protest that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I represent major retailers who have property across the country, and when they're in North Carolina, and they're stuck with a 2019 valuation after COVID, and they don't have a remedy to reduce that value. Certain jurisdictions have the ability to ratchet down when values drop, like Prop 13 in California. You can challenge it through what's called a Prop 8 appeal if the value goes below where the assessment is. But it's true. What goes up also comes down, and we're certainly going to see that, particularly in office, over this next cycle.
So Christy had another question. Are rental properties capped at 20% this year?
Rental properties, so
non-homesteaded properties.
Yeah, non-homesteaded properties would be capped at 20% if they are under $5 million in value.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's great news. It still doesn't sound like a lot, but when we were seeing doubling figures, during obviously the peak of the marketplace, that is relief. And I know that's a hot topic about non-homesteaded properties. And, I'll go on to the political side of things right now, which is where Daniel and his advocacy with, Metrotex. We actually interview in over 100 different races. Metrotex does in our jurisdiction, and so many obviously have taxing, authority in doing so. And having that conversation, having those consultations with people like you, Mark, and Daniel to help us craft how we can also hold, our elected officials' feet to the fire. And you know what we heard over and over again? Well, the school district is the biggest burden. So why do we need to change our budgeting process? And it just blew my mind. And you're sitting there, and I'm like, I don't care if it's a 10% of the total tax bill or 1% of the total tax bill. Still making sure that we're being fiscally responsible while having a balance in funding city services and making sure that we've got good development in the right direction for the future of our local areas. We just have this very apathetic viewpoint, though, where it's like school districts are the problem. So that's a state and school district issue. And I think that's just a really negative way to do it, because anything helps. To Christy's point, 20%. Yeah, that still sounds really high, but for a non-homesteaded property, that's huge. Again, for a non-homesteaded property, if there was a decrease in other rental or other taxing entities, that would be huge. It's the compounding effect. And so I kind of want to touch on that. See, look, it's already 9 minutes left. We get stuck in all this, but this has been a great conversation. Those are the things I think we need to also talk about from a advocacy standpoint, what we can do. We've talked about structurally with the process, the tax code, and what we can do when this all occurs. But there's also something we can do beforehand, in a less reactionary and a more proactive conversation. And Daniel, maybe, you can touch on that a little bit of what realtors do. As much as we don't like that we have a very large voice sometimes and a large amount of members, we do. And both local, state, and national officials do talk to us. So what can we do on our side to really have more conversations around these very topics?
Sure. I think one thing we haven't talked about really, we mentioned it, but one thing, as Mark mentioned a little while ago, it's the appraisal times, the tax rate equals your levy. And I think a lot of people get focused on the appraisal, and rightfully so. There are certain times when, you should protest that valuation. But how many times have we heard people say, oh, I'm going to go down to the appraisal district and protest my taxes? Well, that's not what you're doing. You're protesting your valuation. But people tend to forget that second part of the equation, which is the tax rate. So, I think from an advocacy standpoint, I think people need to, remember that there is that second part of the equation, and that they should be reaching out to their local elected officials, not just on the school board, but the city council and your county commissioner's court, and really hold their feet to the fire. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is that all new property added to the appraisal roll from one year to the next, that's all free and clear money that's not included in the no new revenue tax rate. So if you have a parking lot, as an example, that then becomes a 50-story building, all of that revenue coming in from that 50-story building is now free money to the local jurisdictions, and it's not included in the no new revenue tax rate. So cities, counties, they take that money and they run with it. That's why you see, typically budgets, increase year over year. But I think we need to make sure that people understand that there is that second part of the equation, and they really need to have their voice heard, by their local elected officials, that, hey, we understand that we're growing as a community. Yes, we like that growth, but, is the growth in the budget reflective of the growth in population? And I think that's where a lot of the rub comes in. So you could have a 3% growth in population, but have a 20% growth in your budget year over year. Is that necessary? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. But those are the conversations I think people should be having with their local elected officials.
Yeah, I'd just like to chime in too on the question of caps. We have a homestead cap, a 10% cap. And if you're in a fast growing area, you've benefited from that 10% cap. There's a material difference between properties that are owned as homesteads versus properties that are leased. And the problem with caps when you put it on a rental property is you basically stop transactions. And let me explain.
Sure.
If you have a 5 or 10% cap on a property that leases, right? The owner of that property will be able to charge less rent than a buyer of a new property or an existing property that will get reset at market value. So if you have an office building or a house or anything, that, let me just use an example. Let's say that you have a property that you bought for $1 million and you lease it. And because of a cap, after 10 years, that property is now at 1.5 million, but the market value is 4 million. And competitors come in or decide not to come in because they know that they're going to buy a property for 4 million, be taxed at on 4 million, where their competition is going to be taxed at 1.5 million, which means that their competition will be able to charge much less in rent to make the same return. We can't allow our appraisal system to distort markets any more than taxation does, right? And so the problem with making what appear to be logical decisions on appraisal caps to provide property tax relief is that you end up having a host of unintended consequences. And those relate to real anti-competition and a huge problem with sales transactions. If you look at the California residential market, you can see what's happened with a pretty aggressive appraisal cap. People never leave their home because they can't afford to.
Right.
And the same thing would happen in commercial, where instead of a typical trade of commercial real estate, people would hold those properties because they have a competitive advantage to hold those properties.
Well, and Mark, and that's what we've obviously seen not only with the caps, but now the interest rate. I was at an event this morning and there was a woman speaking on the panel who's not a realtor, and she goes, and that's why I'll never move because I have a 3% interest rate. And,
Exactly.
I mean, you want to sit there and argue with them, but at the same time you go, I get it, So if you have a 3% interest rate and this suppression of increase in value, what we have to understand, back to Chandler's, comment of unintended and adverse consequences. And while it sounds really great to do all of these things to provide instant relief, you're upsetting the entire ecosystem. And that's really, I think, what we have to be looking at. But that's why we have mechanisms in place. We only have a couple minutes left. I think that's why we wanted to highlight that while Texas has some of the largest property taxes, we also have the best system in which we can, I don't want to use the term arbitrate, fight, look at those. And so at least we have, I don't want to say it's fair and just, but at least there's a mechanism in which we can and look at those things. The last thing I want to touch on, which I'm sure we could do a whole nother session on, though, is that Daniel, you did say that the governor made a comment today that, he really wanted to make strides in putting us on a path to get rid of property taxes. Can you summarize in 2 minutes or less just give an idea, because people are going to hear that and see that and go, oh my gosh, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. But again, back to unintended consequences, or why that's not a reality in the way we're set up right now.
Yes. I mean, certainly, can you do it? Yes, you can, but you have to put it in context that the entire property tax system on an annual basis is basically about $76 billion. So, half of that is for schools, half of it is for all other taxing jurisdictions. I think when we hear we want to put Texas on a path to eliminate property taxes, I think what elected officials mean by that is they want to try to get rid of the school maintenance and operations side of the equation, which is about 35 to 38 billion. So you can certainly do it, and it's just a simple math equation. But ultimately, you have to remember that no one's talking about giving anybody more money in their pocket. That money would still be generated, but just through some other additional revenue process, some other tax mechanism, whatever it is. People have talked about a consumption tax, sales tax. You can certainly do it on that, but I believe for every cent increase in the state sales tax rate, it would generate $3 billion. So if we need to generate $38 billion to get rid of school property taxes, that's about 12, 13 cents ish. So you would just add that to the 6.25 state sales tax rate, and then add the 2 cents for locals. So my public school math tells me that's about 22 cents
Yep.
on a sales tax rate. So if we can certainly do it, but I just don't know the will of people if they want to pay 22% on $1,000 purchase.
I think, and I think that's the issue. We don't have an income tax in Texas. We don't have real estate transfer taxes in Texas. That's been a big driver of our economic growth, but we have to fund government somehow. And what I think people will realize if they're just patient and allow what happened in 2019 to truly have its effect, we are headed towards 1 to 1.5% tax rates in Texas. We used to be at 2.5 to 3 for most of my career. So we're basically going to have the overall tax rate in Texas. And that's going to take so much pressure off of people. But it'll also have the unintended consequence of increasing real estate values. Nothing is static. Everything's dynamic. And so as you reduce property taxes, you increase value because it's always going to flow to what's affordable for people.
Yep. Well, I appreciate that last little bit of hope, but then also with like, instead of like the compliment sandwich, you did like the hope in the middle and then the gloom and doom on the sandwich. No, I'm just kidding, Mark. But again, that's why we have to talk about it, right, guys? I mean, there's a cause and effect. And it's not that we're always intending to upset the apple cart or have these unintended consequences, but we have to think about these. And that's why we need people like you, Daniel, and you, Mark, to bring these conversations specifically to our legislators and our local municipalities and our appraisal districts to really have these critical conversations, because there's unfortunately, there's not always the smart enough person in the room to articulate and speak on these things. And we appreciate both of you and what you do, both individually in your own industries, but also for the realtor organizations and the advocacy portion. And we just need to continue to be informed and to have these conversations, to vote, and understand what your rights are as a voter. And that means hold your local taxing entities accountable. And that's the best thing that you can do. So we appreciate it, guys. Have a wonderful evening, and hopefully, look at all that. We got so many things. We didn't have a ton of questions, but I think people were probably taking notes and consuming at the same time. So you guys were great, and hopefully you'll be willing to join us again very soon.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Thank you very much.